Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Broadcasting in Collegiate panel. My name's Ayan, and I am a business development manager at hearo.live. And I'm going to be introducing our guests today. We have, sorry, I'm going to go around and let everyone kind of introduce themselves before we dive into some of our questions. Take it away.
Cool.
We can start with Kate.
Okay.
Hello, I am Kate. I work as a freelance broadcast engineer and wear multiple hats in the production line. I am self-employed, so I just represent myself. And yeah, we're here with a bunch of lovely people.
Thank you. And can you introduce yourself, please, Sam?
Sure. Hi, my name is Sam Morris. I'm currently the CEO of Space Productions. We're a full-service broadcast company specializing in anything from weddings to esports. Most recently, I've worked with a lot of the Utah esports people and helped build out their program, and super excited to talk more about collegiate esports.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Austen.
Hey guys, my name is Austen Roberts. I come from the old days of MLG, currently working for Skillshot Media as their executive producer and production lead. Skillshot Media, as well as Space Productions, does a lot of things for white label clientele, but also we have a lot of our internal owned, operated productions. So it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Austen. And last but not least, Jordan.
Yeah, my name is Jordan Ousley. I am the director of esports media for Maryville University, located in St. Louis, Missouri. I was previously a travel videographer for a professional organization, eUnited, and then I transitioned to my role here at Maryville about 1.5 years ago. So I've been doing that for, like I said, 1.5 years, and just navigating the collegiate landscape, and excited to talk about broadcasting today.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your experiences with us. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I know that in college esports, broadcasting is extremely important since so much esports, so much revolving around our industry is focused on the content that we produce. So when we're looking at a time during COVID, more and more student organizations are now focusing on streaming online tournaments and even how to run their intercollegiate leagues. What are some of the core components of a production team, and what are some easy to implement standards, team roles, and or inexpensive equipment amateur and college production teams are commonly missing? Sam, do you want to take this away?
Sure. There's a lot of stuff that people, I think, do right on the collegiate level, and a lot of these organizations, especially when they come into it from the college side and the college is starting to embrace and support them, they have access to a whole slew of computers, but not much else. So it turns into, I don't have access to a capture card. I don't have access to cameras. I don't have access to like a set. I don't have access to this kind of stuff, but you have access to a bunch of computers. So it really boils down to how effectively can you use those computers and how effectively can you work around solutions that you may not be able to implement if you had, or you may be able to implement if you had like a $35,000 budget, but instead you only have maybe $1,000 to buy. That's not even like a full camera. That's like half a camera. And that's not even including your set. So it just comes down to manpower and effectively operating a lot of your manpower, producing the correct amount of content, and then doing the best with what you can using technology like NDI instead of using SDI for switchers and like new technology. I think those are always very solid solutions to begin with. For that's our co-founder Victor back there. Yeah, and finding effective solutions that you can do for cheap. But ultimately it boils down to people in my mind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Sam. So, Kate, I know you mentioned that you don't have a college-specific background. Can you share what some of the industry standards would be specifically in this case?
Yeah, so I think Sam touched on really great points, especially utilizing NDI right now. It's kind of shaping remote production, and it's pretty cheap if you have the speeds to do it. I think a really important thing as well that a lot of people bypass is communication and like setting a signal flow and a list of what your goals are that you want to do instead of having like this one overarching goal you can't achieve, maybe making a list of 5 to 10 things. And once you start checking off boxes that you succeeded in those, the other things will come more naturally and hopefully easier as well.
Yeah, thank you. And just to like dial it back to the scholastic esports perspective, did you have anything to add, Austen?
Yeah, I think in working with collegiate esports, it's been the number one thing that I've seen is everyone is kind of trying to compete against each other, right? So everyone wants to have the best of the best, and so they end up going out and spending a ton of money on things that they don't necessarily need to spend money on. I think having an understanding, like Kate said, of your equipment and your signal flow and kind of the expectation of what you want to deliver. I've seen some of the best broadcasts happen on an OBS setup compared to a New Tech or a Ross Carbonite. So I think it really all boils down to, again, the communication, the signal flow, and overall just setting the expectation of what you want to do in that broadcast and then making it happen. Coming from the world of webcams and single computers and Mac laptops and stuff like that, to now vMix and OBS and even Blackmagic ATEMs. There's a whole nother world out there, and ultimately you can do whatever you want to do. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it with the signal flow and working with your team.
Consistency too. Sorry, I'm going to speak out of turn here a little bit, Ayan. Like
no,
when it comes
fine.
to like building content out too, I think the biggest key in like collegiate that a lot of people are missing, they might have this badass stream that comes out like once in a blue moon, like every like 4 months or so. And that I see that happen all the time, but getting your streams on a consistent basis where you have a stream every single week for 3 months is incredibly difficult to achieve, but will boost your viewership significantly. And I would love to see more programs kind of working on that, like long-term schedule instead of just short bursts.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think we can agree that there's definitely a consistency issue with not just collegiate content but content in general, right? That's definitely a great area to understand. Did you have anything to add, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, Maryville the program started in 2015, and just since my arrival a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, we're working with OBS and a PC, and like using OBS Ninja to stream our caster feeds and stuff. Like, we're doing very grassroots stuff, and we've been around for a while. So I think that speaking on the idea that anybody can really accomplish this as long as you're just consistent and you just kind of focus on the bigger picture stuff and not worry about how incredible your transitions look and all that stuff. I mean, it's really you can do really awesome productions with bare minimum worth of stuff, and as we continue to scale up our productions, we're hopefully going to get into the level of stuff that Sam and Austen and everyone else on the panel are working on. But I typically reach out to producers and people who are just interested and they're just using OBS, and we're able to make things work. And I think with the times of COVID and everything, collegiate broadcasting, as we've said, is just expanding a lot, and I think it's just going to continue to expand. So if there's schools and people out there that want to get involved, it's really easy to get started, and then you can scale it from there. But don't try to bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah, thank you so much for your input. I think it's extremely important that we did kind of look at it from a perspective that's not linear, because in college esports, one of the most valuable characteristics is the education, right? That's why it's scholastic esports, and that component's very important, especially when you're training in a grassroots environment. So what are some lessons or takeaways that you've developed as a professional that you think all students should know? If I'm looking at it from my perspective, I don't actually work just specifically in esports or with an org. I am a part of a company that specializes in broadcasting, but we still have to work with the gaming community. So I just wanted to start with Austen, and if you can just share how that's been a part of your experience, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think to hit that, one of the most important things that I think everyone should realize and fully grasp is you are going to fail, and things are going to happen once you hit that live button that you are not expecting. It ultimately boils down to keeping a cool head, keeping your communication level, and making sure that you're communicating with your team and figuring out the best solution. Because ultimately, and I did this starting out, I'm guilty of it 100%, of frantically just losing the cool, and it doesn't help anybody it actually just makes it worse. So I think having that communication, staying cool, staying level-headed, and realizing that stuff is going to happen, and ultimately, especially with broadcasts, get through it the best you can and figure out what happened after the fact and fix it for next time. But also to that fact, don't let your mindset get to the point where you're always expecting for something to go wrong. You want to always make sure that you're striving for the best. You're pushing to be the perfect broadcast out there. My mentor, who actually works for the NFL Network, has always embedded it into me of just like, there is no perfect broadcast. There is no perfect anything when it comes to broadcasting or any live production. And I think that's the biggest thing that I can put out there for collegiate individuals that are getting into broadcasting and wanting to venture out into the professional industry is be prepared to fail, be prepared to learn from your mistakes, but ultimately realize and accept those wins and move forward and constantly improve yourself.
Thank you so much. I wanted to kind of also just focus and kind of direct it towards Sam now. What are some of the actionable ways you've done this in your production and broadcasting company, and how can people learn from that? Like directly recruiting from the grassroots community and teaching people these very important principles that Austen mentioned.
Yeah, I found that ironically, when it comes into an education setting, the low stake broadcasts are of higher value than the super high profile contracts. Because especially when it comes to education, and it helps alleviate a lot of the pressure of being like, if all of a sudden you're working for, let's say, even a gig of like, all of a sudden now you get a gig for like Nerd Street Gamers. It's like, okay, cool, that's a recognized brand. All the students are going to recognize it, and it's like, oh, that's very stressful. Like, what if I mess this up? It's like, I don't want to mess this up. This is maybe my 5th time like producing something. Like, I am confident, but I'm not like super confident, and but someone else might believe in you. But I really like where Collegiate kind of fills in the boundary, where like ironically the collegiate viewership levels with like getting 30 to 150 people is actually better in my mind, because one, it's significantly less pressure for the casters. The amount of time I've had a student caster come out and be like, oh, we're at 50 viewers. Oh my God, I'm so scared. Or like all of a sudden they'll be on the front page of Twitch and we'll get 1,000 viewers and they'll be like, oh my God, I can't do this. And then they turn into a whole nother caster. And it's interesting to see how people work under pressure, but creating low stake broadcasts for people to not just like mess up on, because you're always going to see people mess up on. He hit the nail on the head. There's no perfect broadcast, but give them a chance to create something new and innovative and kind of push the boundaries of it. And especially when it comes to like vMix and OBS, I always like kind of encourage my students to learn the boundaries of vMix. And it's fine for you to mix things live sometimes and like add in inputs. Like normally I would say, no, do not do this. Never do this in the live setting for like a bigger profile thing. But when it comes to these lower viewership things, yeah, sure, mess around. You want to put in a noodle or third? Let's try it. Go put it in GT title editor. And Austen's giving a look right now. But it's something that I really enjoy seeing in Collegiate as a chance to experiment, grow, and kind of push the boundaries and learn where things can mess up. But it's your job as lead producer to really come in and create a safe playground for people to mess around with. Like I would never say like if you were streaming it out on vMix and that was like your main mixing and your main streaming thing to do that, but having an secondary like OBS that handles the encoding and you have a fallout screen, it's like, okay, maybe it's fine if the mixer messes up once and you have a fallout screen, worst case scenario. So the stream still goes on. But creating these effective playgrounds and these low stake broadcasts for people to mess around, experiment, and learn is very pivotal.
Thank you, Sam. I wanted to also direct this question more towards Kate. How would you say that this plays into setting up standards for professionals that are going to be entering the industry and have to be held to a certain level? How do you get over some of these learning barriers?
Well, I think what Austen and Sam both said was like, that's usually my go-to is like remain calm. Like even if everything is on fire, remain calm, especially if you're in like a lead position or seniority position, because your mood directly reflects off of your team. Like in a production line, that's your family for the week or month. And like if somebody's having bad vibes, it's totally going to reflect on the entire show. So even if like you can't handle it, like step away for a moment and take a breath. But like ultimately everybody fails eventually. Like major broadcasts have issues all the time. It's not the end of the world. And the more you sulk on it, like the longer it will take to resolve the issue, which is usually a stupid and easy issue to fix. um, Another thing that like it used to kind of hinder me, and I've gotten over it, but I used to view like myself knowing so many skills but not mastering any, kind of being like a jack of all trades, master of none, as like a downfall, because there was nothing that I was super skilled in. But like anyone that has those traits where you know multiple things but you don't feel like you're the awesomest at one thing, that's okay. And like you'll be an asset definitely to everybody, because there's tons of things out there to know, and like nobody knows everything. So don't put yourself down for thinking you're not the best at something, because you're just not there yet.
Very well put. Thank you. I wanted to kind of focus this on your experience, Jordan, working with Maryville, their school with a really great reputation in the college esports space. So with all the collegiate leagues that are currently popping up, what are some of the unique barriers that you've noticed that every college or amateur league runs into when they're trying to gain traction? How did you at Maryville overcome these barriers, and what kind of advice can you give to people who might be in the same position?
I think that with all these collegiate leagues popping up, I think communicating with the tournament organizers in the leagues is really important. Understanding what their goals are and understanding how they are intending to approach the production and approach the season. So that way you can kind of be on the same page with them, I think is really important. I think that oftentimes a lot of people just kind of neglect communication with a lot of these people. And I think that we're in a space, especially with collegiate and especially with collegiate esports, it's just so fresh still that I think everybody is just wanting everybody to succeed, and everybody wants everybody to just do better. And, you know, I've reached out to Sam multiple times asking questions about, you know, production things on our side. So I think, you know, don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help, you know, what they're trying to do with their leagues. You know, all these leagues are popping up, and unfortunately, like there's a lot to get into it. But you know, I like seeing all these leagues that are, you know, making a statement, and especially, you know, you look at like the Face It Scouting Ground series that just happened over the summer. You know, there was a lot of different leagues and stuff just for that, different tournaments just for that. And they were all uniquely different in the way that they handled the casters, the production, the broadcasts, everything. So I think, you know, if you're a league coming up, like don't be afraid to get wild and have fun with it. And if you're somebody in a role like mine who is communicating with these leagues, who manages the players and manages, you know, promoting this stuff on social media and just trying to figure that stuff out, don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions and just make sure you're on the same page with them.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I also kind of wanted to touch on something that you mentioned, and a lot of these issues can come up with the problem of funding. So money is always an issue when a league isn't backed by a publisher. So what are some of the most important things that need to be done by leagues to maximize their chances of getting revenue in order to sustain themselves? And how have you approached this problem? I think I want to hear about it from a collegiate specific perspective.
Yeah, that's real tough. I think, as I mentioned, I think, you know, making yourself stand out amongst the crowd. There's a lot of leagues popping up. There's a lot of broadcast and production stuff popping up. I think if you want to secure revenue and kind of make that a next step for you in your league, I think making sure that you're checking all the boxes with everything, and just making sure that you're standing out amongst the crowd of all these other leagues that are popping up. I'm sure Sam and Austen can probably speak a little bit more towards, you know, what they've experienced with different leagues that are popping up.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of like crazy leagues. Each one kind of comes in their own way. I think the biggest problem that I always see with a lot of these leagues is because the hard part with making money with these leagues is ultimately the way that you make money is you have more eyeballs on your league. The best way to get more eyeballs is to get more teams in the league, to open it up to more students, to get more people actively involved in it. But the problem is a lot of these leagues, and I think we saw it with like the early phase of TESPA, and we saw it even with some of like the Face It not Rocket League, Rainbow Six tournament that just came out last semester, where it was just like all of a sudden they go from doing nothing with this league and having minimal marketing and the league just starts to all of a sudden having 1,000 people in it. And there's steps in between there that need to happen. And at least with like organizations like Face It, they've done these kind of like large scale tournaments before and they understand how to do it. But I see a lot of like student leagues trying to do the same thing where like maybe they might not have the same classical experience and they instantly jump to that 1,024 people ASAP. And I think there's a lot of room for innovation and creativity when it comes to collegiate esports, specifically with playing in a lot of like the Power 5 conferences. And instead of doing it broad to as many people as possible, let's instead narrow it down to these traditional sports conferences and kind of playing off of what we've seen in the past with like football, where Pac-12 people want to see Pac-12 esports as much as they want to see Pac-12 sports. Granted, a lot of people, the conversion between sports fans to esports fan is always rough, but it's more interesting to watch Utah versus Colorado than Utah versus some random Ohio school that's kicking everyone's ass.
Yeah, to jump in here real quick, I also, for collegiate sports, it's also imperative, especially on the esports side, that they approach these leagues from a unique standpoint. And by that, I mean, don't automatically go after trying to duplicate what Face It and all these other major companies that have years of experience. And I can't count on all my hands how many times people would go out and try to duplicate what Major League Gaming and ESL would try to do. You don't, and it's not a bad thing, but you don't have the resources that they have at their disposal. So ultimately, it's the point of trying to find those pinpointed things within the tournament structure and the broadcast structure and bring that to your realm and make the best of it. So to basically sum it up, like, don't go after like the top tier guys and try to duplicate what they're trying to do with a smaller budget. Take the key points for that, bring it down to your level, and just make it look amazing.
Yeah, scale at your own rate. Don't be afraid to do that. I remember when we did like College Rainbow Six League, we originally approached it and we're like, yeah, we could do like 64 teams or like even like 128 teams. And I was like, wait, like that's a lot of teams. That's a lot of people to manage. We're a crew of like 4 people with a $2,000 budget for like a semester. Like we can't do that effectively. So instead we scaled down the league, really kind of honed in, found our niche and specialized it. We made sure like all the games were recorded. We wanted every single game that was played recorded. It was all best of ones to help accommodate that, and made it so that our tournament admins had specialized tools. Like we had a tournament admin bot that was basically a ticket bot. So instead of having private DMs and having to have more tournament admins to scale up there, we had just had a ticket bot. So anyone in the crew could easily come through and answer the tickets quickly. It just scale appropriately, find your niche, and drive it home, and keep on producing solid content.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to kind of point out something that was brought up in the audience. So how much overlap would you say that there is between traditional broadcast training, like radio, TV, broadcast majors, and esports broadcasting? Because I think it's really important that we kind of make a realistic perception of what esports broadcasting looks like in comparison to the more traditional streams. Does anyone want to chime in?
Yeah, go Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, of course. I have a background from real sports as well and real broadcast. And I'd say like they both start at the same level. Like learning anything you learn in a real broadcast situation transfers directly into esports, and it'll set your foundation for you to be good at what you're doing. Of course, when you get more into gaming tournaments and stuff like that, you're dealing with... Sorry, I hear something. When you get more to like gaming tournaments, you're dealing with a lot of online stuff that a lot of actual broadcast companies don't deal with. When you're talking about NDI, most companies aren't familiar with that. A lot of companies are just now going over to vMix due to remote stuff because they're learning about RTMP and how useful it is. So I would say like all skills are good to harness, and with broadcast specific, they all start from the same, like it all starts in the same spot.
Yeah, to bounce off that too, I think like learning the vocabulary, a lot of the vocabulary overlays very well, and kind of figuring out once you're like in that crew setting and just listening to people make calls and just that culture of broadcast, I think kind of is retained throughout all elements of broadcast, where it's like that keep a level-headed, stay cool, keep your sentences brief and to the point, and find a solution as quickly as possible. Clear comms, all that kind of stuff is very much overlapping. I think from my experience of seeing, like, I used to help with like the football broadcast up at the University of Utah, and coming back to esports, I'm just like, the budget difference is astronomical. It's insane. So like whenever I look at like esports broadcasts, I'm like, man, this is scrappy compared to like what could be out there. But then I look at like the football broadcast and I'm just like, you're not even using like 90% of this technology. Like it's all going to like waste. I'm like, what? You have like all this super expensive ROS equipment, but you only use like the carbonite. Like, what are you doing? So it's interesting to see just the difference of scale and the most effective use of it. Because people will have $1 million budgets, they'll blow $1 million. But in esports, it's the opposite. It's like you have a $2,000 budget, but really you're doing what a $250,000 budget should do for the same budget. And I just love seeing the scrappiness of esports compared to traditional broadcast. And the innovation carries over too. Once you learn the technology, like people will always be impressed that you can do things for cheaper in a traditional broadcast setting.
Yeah, so to highlight and just bring up the point that you mentioned, there's like a clear disparity, big difference between college broadcast level and like professional broadcast, because as we know, like it's an extremely expensive industry to be in, and there's a lot that goes into it and different factors. So what kind of skills or experience do your company specifically look for when they're hiring? Like what do you look for at, let's say, Space or Skillshot? What is it that you want to hire in a candidate that's coming in from the collegiate side?
You want to take it, Austen?
Yeah. So we kind of have two elements to it, and for me personally, one of the biggest things I've learned about, especially in esports, is showing is more than showing me what you can do is better than reading it on a piece of paper. So I've always had the background, and this worked for me as well when I first got into the industry, of just working your way up through the process. For me personally, I'm looking for defined communication. I'm looking for hard work ethics. I'm looking for less ego, more teamwork. So don't come into it with a mindset of I know everything or whatnot. Like come into it with an open mindset of like I'm willing to learn and I want to learn more about the space. Like I've been doing this for 12 plus years. I don't even know everything, and I don't ever claim to know everything. And it's just because the space is constantly developing and constantly changing. So everyone is always changing and learning new things. So I would say communication, hard work ethics, and overall just have a passion for it. And I can say that that's the one thing that differentiates between traditional sports television and esports for me is I'll be on a production line with a bunch of guys and they'll really get into it. And you don't really see it that often with traditional sports, but you do with esports because everyone's super hyped about it and super excited. But that can also be a downfall too. It can distract you. It can make it to where you're so into the gameplay and hyping up the teams and stuff like that to where you miss calls or whatnot. So I would say, yeah, like I said, it's just going after those key elements for me is ideally what I look for in candidates at Skillshot.
Yeah, I think I definitely look for very much similar things. The ego thing is a very, very solid point. There's a lot of people in esports broadcast specifically and in broadcast that have this mentality of I have to keep everything close to my chest. The way that I created this, I'm not going to tell you these secrets. And I'm just like, dude, you can't do that. Like we're all in this together. We all got to build out this stuff. And I understand like you want to keep your trade secrets. Sure, that's fine. But at the end of the day, like give me a month or two and I'll figure out exactly what you're doing. It'll just take me time to figure it out. So looking for people that are good at teamwork, don't have an ego, and are able to adapt quickly is very, very important. And a lot of this you can kind of figure out in like a 10-minute interview where it's just like you start talking like interlaying like various different types of things. You drop hints at another thing and you're just like, okay, you actually know what you're talking about versus you have no idea. You know how to do it on OBS and you don't know how to do it anywhere else. And I've seen that happen a lot where people just pigeonhole themselves in one type of technology and forget that everyone has a different setup. And sometimes the best experience that you can get is bouncing between crews because everyone does everything differently. Even if it's like something as minor as like, okay, cool, these might be the exact same shows, but one team uses communication TeamSpeak versus one team uses communications on Discord. And learning the intricacies of TeamSpeak is very, very effective. And bringing it back to your broadcast can create a huge impact. Like I may still work at like a CEO of Space Productions here, but I still enjoy doing like random tech director gigs with other crews to really like learn, innovate, and keep my gears turning about like what's new in the world of esports, what's new in the world of for traditional broadcast. And I think it's always important to stay ahead of the curve and keep learning, keep learning from people, keep learning from documents, read about like all the stuff on sports video graphics, svg.com. I think they always have very good like case studies on there, and just finding people that are highly educated, passionate, and are looking to learn. Because a huge focus of ours at Space Productions is collegiate, and we always look for people that are more hungry to learn, and we'll prioritize that over just someone that has a whole bunch of experience and may feel like they're at the top of their game. Because I really enjoy bringing people in, kind of sculpting them, building them, and teaching them a lot of our signal flows and teaching them what to expect from the world. And it's always amazing to bring someone from collegiate into the professional world and seeing them actually feel like, oh, I'm actually getting paid a fair rate, and this is actually what I should get paid, instead of having to volunteer for their 15th gig and hopefully get some kind of experience or make their big break.
So you brought up a very important point, so that even though, like, I just want everyone to kind of understand that even though in broadcast you're working with other people, you're constantly collaborating, you're always learning new things, there's a lot of self-development that goes in there too, right? You mentioned the term gigs, rates, and all of this language that would make sense to fellow freelancers like Kate. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective from one freelancer to another, how you navigated the space doing that, and what type of experiences did you want to share with anyone who feels like broadcast might be for them and doesn't quite know where to start there?
Yeah, it's been a long process, but we can condense it down for everybody's sake. Definitely. I was one of the few, as Sam mentioned earlier, of people volunteering for multiple events. And a lot of people advise against volunteering because you're working for free. But every gig I worked, I left with like this much knowledge. And then by like my 10th gig, I had so much knowledge that I got contracted to a company. And then esports is like a very tight-knit community to where once you get contracted for one company, they all talk. And if you did a good job on that show, somebody's going to know about you at a future show. And I think like a really important thing coming into it, if you're going to go the volunteer route to start, or if you have a collegiate opportunity, is consistency. Even if you're saying like you're working a game you really don't care about, act like it's your favorite game in the world. Like have the consistency you would have at every gig, because it follows you in this world and it'll follow you throughout your career. And like ask questions, especially if you're volunteering. Like if you're not getting paid, like ask everything you can learn and more. Definitely.
Thank you. So I noticed that you brought up that it's like a very small space, a lot of talking happens. So they're being made in the space, especially with relation to broadcasting and how it continues to evolve. So what kinds of trends would you like to see, Jordan, in the college space as more college leagues are created that will kind of give that prestige and like that shiny feeling to college esports just as much as you would see it in professional sports broadcasting?
Yeah, I think so. I've run into issues a couple of different times with developers and tournament organizers where they're like pretty restrictive on what you're allowed to do with your broadcast. And I think that that's very against what we really need to be doing in the collegiate space. There's a lot of hoops that you and hoops that you have to jump through with some of these tournament organizers that just don't really make much sense if we're just trying to grow the space equally. And it's really frustrating at times. And I think that if you're a league that's coming up, I think having the ability, giving teams and programs like mine, like a Maryville, the ability to stream these games if they're not on the mainstream, giving them the resources that they need in order to make that soon. I think that it's just like really important in order to continue continue to push collegiate esports, I think is really important in order to work with people in a role like mine. I feel like I have a pretty unique role, and there's not a lot of people that are direct hires at universities that kind of focus on media specifically. And one thing that I'm trying to do is to kind of get the conversation started about why aren't we allowed to stream these? Why, if it's not on the main broadcast, why can't we do these? And I think if you're a grassroots tournament coming up or a league that's coming up, I think just, allowing, people like myself to to stream everything, because people want to see the competition. If you have a big program, if you have people, there's a lot of personalities in collegiate esports. We have a lot of people. We just had 2 players that just went pro to Golden Guardians. Like, we have a lot of big personalities on our team, and a lot of people are fans of these players, even though they're just college students playing League of Legends, they're playing Overwatch, and they want to watch, their favorite player play just as they would if they're watching LeBron James, or, take it to the esports, perspective, watching Licorice or whoever. Like, they want to see their players play. So allowing programs in order to do that would be, I think, really important.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of touch on what you might have brought up, that there can be a lot of restrictions. So as we know, like grassroots college leagues, they tend to have like a mixed relationship with the publishers that run official tournaments, even though they're helping us grow the scene, it can kind of stifle, like, I guess, the elements that you covered, like creativity and what the students can do themselves. And sometimes they even take over completely, which can kind of just like completely destruct what it means to like be like an organic thing, because communities are very organic. So where do grassroots leagues stand now in that ecosystem in relationship to our publishers, as we've seen, like with some leagues having to completely close down community initiatives?
I'll take this just for a brief minute. I think it's tough right now because I think the developers are also kind of trying to figure out what collegiate looks like on their end as well, with a lot of big games like Overwatch and League of Legends, especially. Those are the 2 that we focus on at Maryville. I think they're still trying to figure out what their collegiate landscape looks like. And when a tournament or a league pops up that they are unfamiliar with, or they, have some issues with, I think it's very easy for them to shut down just because they're not ready yet. So I think that, staying within your means and not trying to push too hard to be taking over and to kind of stay in your lane as, this is a grassroots project. This is for a small scale or whatever, I think is really important. I'm sure Sam and Austen and probably Kate have more experience with that kind of stuff. But I just think that, a lot of these answers, or a lot of these questions, are going to be answered, I think, pretty quickly within the next couple of years with Collegiate, as these developers are slowly trying to figure out what their landscape looks like for Collegiate and what their system looks like, and then we'll allow more grassroots and opportunities to pop up over time.
Yeah, I think like a good start for this is what TESPA's done with their varsity league. I think it was interesting for the main season, where they allowed a lot of freedom for people to get involved, and it was a very solid schedule. There was a lot of feedback that they listened to, like creating more like round robin formats, or creating anything but Swiss in reality, so that we can actually see who's coming up next, and creating opportunities for schools to really take their investment within their program and showcase it and make it shine. The big problem there is just a lot of these leagues are forbidding universities from showcasing their students and creating their personalities, which stifles the entire pipeline from the bottom up. Because if I can't showcase the games, then I can't sell against them, and then I can't create personalities. I can't create a brand. It creates all these huge problems that at the end of the day, it's on the leagues, as since it's all publisher owned, to help facilitate a lot of these opportunities for these developing programs.
Yeah, I think to that point, to add as well really quick, is the collegiate esports scene can also help in development. Believe it or not, like one of the number one things that I've seen in working with publishers from a broadcast angle, both at time at MLG and Iron Gaming and all the past companies that I worked for, is brand guidelines and following the guidelines that they set out. It's been famous to have this whole demeanor of just do it and ask for forgiveness later. Unfortunately, from a publisher standpoint, it's the one thing that they hate. So do your best. And if I can give any kind of advice tonight, is do your best to follow those guidelines and stick within the realms of making sure that you're above board with all of your broadcasts and tournament ops and everything like that. This will go a long ways towards getting those publishers to get on board with allowing more people to get involved with their games.
I think a great example too that you could see is, it just flew out of my head actually. Shoot. Never mind. I'm sorry.
It's all right. While we get back to the thought that was in your head, I kind of wanted to touch on what was brought up. It's just that all of this does sound like a very long-term learning experience. It's not something you're going to learn right away. So one of the ways that college students tend to learn is by making those mistakes, because they're very important to make. And then like as leaders in the space, like we can help them make those mistakes so that they can figure out how to learn from them. I've made a couple of rookie broadcasting mistakes. Like I bugged in an executive producer on a major production once because I didn't realize I was supposed to not talk. So I wanted to get Kate's input, because you definitely like have been you've been a part of the space for a very long time. So can you just share what some of those mistakes you've seen from like amateurs and students that are just getting into the space on their first gigs?
I mean, it's kind of like just calling people out. I guess like a few like key things that like nobody's ever gonna hire you or bring you back is like learn how to properly wrap a cable. Like learn how to properly wrap a cable. Do not put it over your elbow. You can watch a YouTube video, take you like a minute, and then you're gonna be like an A+. If I see you at a show, I'll give you a gold star. Like really simple things like that. Also like you probably get to run a show that tells you people's names and their positions. Kind of learn the line of command. For like an example, like if you have a small issue with like, I don't know, a light bulb went out in the green room, maybe you don't need to go tell the producer that. Maybe you can get someone a little bit lower on the chain of command, so that way they think you're really competent and you're not bothering them. Yeah, those are good tips, I think.
I think to chime in real quick, I work a lot with students at our university that are really interested in just kind of what we do as a program. A lot of times they really don't have any sort of specific goal in mind as to what they want to do. They just want to be involved in esports, and like that's just their passion. I have students that I'm working with currently that say that they're interested in broadcasting, right? So I'm pushing them to the right people to figure out how to operate OBS, so that way we can do some more in-house productions over time. I think reaching out to the people that are in positions like mine, or directors of programs, if you're a smaller program or whoever, and just asking how you can be involved, I think is really important, because you can kind of see sort of the overall picture of what a program looks like once you're kind of in the mix. We have a student who literally just reached out to us by email a year and a half ago, and he came to Maryville just because we had an esports program, but he didn't have any sort of expectation to be a part of the team. But he showed up. We gave him little tasks over a long period of time, and now he's booking scrims for the league team, and he's doing a lot of work with the league team. So I think reaching out and to caveat that, if you reach out to somebody, don't be offended if you don't get an answer right away. Don't be offended if you don't get an answer at all, or if there's not a position available. It's really hard to bring people into the fold at a mass. So I think reaching out, seeing how you can help. If you have a skill, if you're interested in broadcasting, if you've done work in the past, mention that, because I think we're always looking for people to sort of level up our programs. And I think that if you continue to reach out and to bug those people, I think you're going to find a spot in the program. And then as you grow in the program, your roles will increase, and then you can expand to a role like Sam's or Austen's or Kate's. I think that there's a lot of paths that you could start as just a club member at your university and just kind of work your way up from there.
Yeah, I think to echo that really is be prepared to work. Like starting out, Kate, I'm sure you were right there, and same with Sam. I went probably 6 to almost a year of not being paid, volunteering at events, working my way up, being an executive producer now. I never forget what I've gone through to get there, because I started out as a production assistant. I started out as a volunteer, doing all the hard manual labor, and and now getting to work with those guys, it's a privilege and an honor to be able to teach them what I've been able to learn over the years. And I think that's what everyone needs to understand and remember is it's not an easy industry. It's not a 9-to-5 job. Broadcasting is a lot of hard work, a lot of long hours, and it's something you ultimately, back to what I originally said, you've got to be passionate for it.
Thank you. I really appreciate like the varied perspectives on this because it's extremely important for students to understand who want to get into this space. I also wanted to also shed light on the fact that we just experienced a crazy year, like COVID-19, and everything has impacted our jobs, how we work. So what would you say is your advice to students who are struggling with teaching themselves how to use AV equipment from home because of COVID? What kinds of solutions have you been able to provide to yourselves? Because a lot of this is on the go, right? And I still want to focus on that we're part of 2020 and 2020 the sequel.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how people have kind of shifted completely into remote broadcast situations. You see a lot of these studios basically having all of this super expensive equipment. And I remember I was talking with a friend of mine, Boyer, we call them log cabins, where it's like people just have a whole army of computers in their room, and they're basically took all the studio equipment home and are replicating it, and then people are remoting into these situations. And I think there's a lot of those, a lot of these situations and that are happening across the country. So if you're looking to get experience with traditional AV equipment or like any kind of specialized AV equipment, there's a lot of ways to do it remotely. And I think it's even better now than it was before. Because before, like the only way you could really get on like the expensive gear that was like above your pay grade kind of thing was to volunteer or hopefully get a gig that's at a studio that can afford that kind of thing. But now you can hop on and it's cheaper for the studios to do it. And so you have more opportunities to mess around with higher grade equipment.
Yeah, I think something else that I know several companies like Grass Valley and Ross, I think even Blackmagic is starting to do it, is a lot of these online seminars and training courses. I actually commend Ross a lot. We used them when I was in Vegas, when I worked at the arena there. Their online learning for their equipment and software and everything is phenomenal. Honestly, I hope that the rest of the industry and all the other companies kind of take suit and go in that direction. But yeah, I echo Sam. A lot of things have definitely gotten better now compared to when we first started.
Yeah, I would say too, like with what both of you guys are saying is great advice for remoting in and learning a lot of software that you can't get your hands on. But also like it's never a bad idea to read manuals, especially on specific gear. Like the first show I did as a volunteer, I went around and took pictures of every piece of equipment I did not know. And then I went home for that month and I read the manuals on all of the gear. And then the next show I came in, everyone was like, whoa, like, how do you know this? And you read the manual. It's like they gave it to you for a reason. It's super helpful, I swear.
Yeah, and I think just like we've said it in the past, but just don't be afraid to fail. Like, don't be afraid to throw up the test stream. Don't be afraid to have those situations where everything's going wrong, because you learn from those situations the best. Like if you think you have it all set up and ready to go, and then something just goes, catastrophically wrong, you'll probably be able to figure out why pretty quickly. And then that's just the best way to learn. So that way that mistake doesn't happen again in the future. So just don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to reach out for help either.
Yeah, work on building your network too. I think hopping off of the reading the manuals is read the manual, but then also like practice it. Like I think creating effective signal flows and then going to someone who's higher up than you and has more experience than you and being like, do you think this would work? What are the problems with this? What are the faults of this? Like even in my current position, like whenever we get a new piece of hardware, I always talk to someone who's worked with it before, and I'm like, will this work in our environment? Will this work in our setting? Like, I think it'll work. Like I hook up the SDI cables here and I pray it'll work. But like, at the end of the day, there is always like these weird little finicky bugs, and people that have more experience with like a lot of the signal flow stuff will know the problems and will be able to educate you, and then you will know the fun little tips and tricks, and you'll be able to impress the next person at your interview or your job.
Thank you, everybody. I can't say enough how valuable it's been to listen to everybody's unique perspective and how much overlap there is, and also how much there is an emphasis on the ability to learn from one another. So regardless of the stage in your career or in your college, esports, volunteering, whatever you're doing in life right now, there's always an opportunity to continue extending your personal education and personal development. So thank you again. Thank you so much, Sam, Austen, Kate, and Jordan for sharing all of your perspectives. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Collegiate Broadcasting Workshop. Thank you for all the great questions, too.